Okay, class, we're finally on to the autonomic nervous system. Remember day 1 of the nervous system, I brought out a similar chart to this. Sensory going in, motor coming out. So we are going to be talking about visceral motor. This is the autonomic nervous system. We'll kind of review the somatic motor. You've heard that term a lot recently, somatic motor. That is going to the skeletal muscles. That's it. Visceral motor is going to all the smooth muscles in your body, the cardiac muscles, every gland in your body, exocrine and endocrine gland. So the autonomic nervous system is controlling your involuntary actions. These are unconscious actions that are taking place behind the scene. Your body is doing all of this automatically to maintain homeostasis, controlling your heart rate, your blood pressure, your blood temperature, your body temperature, your respiratory airflow. All those things are going on through the visceral motor, aka autonomic nervous system. So, a lot of people, when they're talking about the autonomic nervous system, show you this diagram right off the bat. Now, if you look at this, you look at it and go, oh my God, this is overwhelming. I have no clue what's going on. It just looks too complicated. Don't worry, I'm going to walk you through this step by step. So by the time you see something like this, at the end, it'll make sense to you. But right now, this is not making sense. So let's just start with, when we say visceral motor, there's that word, visceral. What does it mean? You've heard that term before. Think of your ventral body cavities. You have viscera. The viscera there are those organs that are in the ventral body cavities. So in your thoracic cavity, what are the two big organs we're talking about? The heart and lungs. The serous membranes that surround the heart and lungs. What is the name of the serous membrane that is right on top attached to the heart? The visceral pericardium. Visceral pericardium. What about the lung? Visceral pleura. They're using that word visceral because they are talking about the organs in the ventral body cavities. Same thing with abdominal pelvic cavity. We have the visceral peritoneum. What's in the abdominal pelvic cavity? What organs are there? Lots of them. Liver, gallbladder, esophagus, stomach, spleen, intestines. A lot of them. Those are visceral body organs in the ventral body cavities. So the autonomic nervous system is going to be regulating all these organs in your ventral body cavities through the action of smooth muscle that is contained in them, obviously cardiac muscle in the heart, and any glands that are throughout the body, not just in the ventral body cavities, but the glands that are outside the ventral body cavities, like your sweat glands. Those are not in your ventral body cavity, those are in your skin. And the autonomic nervous system is all going to regulate blood vessels that are not in your ventral body cavities. All the blood vessels that are in your arms and legs, the autonomic nervous system is going to regulate the smooth muscle in arteries. Remember, arteries, their tunica media has lots of smooth muscle. So the smooth muscle in arteries is going to cause something called vasodilation, where the blood vessel dilates, or vasoconstriction. That is all going on through the autonomic nervous system too. So not too bad, right? Makes sense so far? Compared the visceral motor compared to the somatic motor, what is somatic motor controlling? Your skeletal muscles. You have control over these most of the time. Very simple. So we talk about the sympathetic division of the autonomic nervous system and the parasympathetic division. People will say sympathetic is fight or flight. This is the division of the autonomic nervous system that is triggered into full gear during moments of emergencies. So I'm sure if you've ever heard the term adrenaline rush, we'll talk about that. That is, you are adrenalized, you are filled with adrenaline. We'll talk about that. The one thing you need to know about the sympathetic division, not only does it go to all our ventral body cavity organs, it goes to the skin structures, sweat glands, the rector pili muscle, the skin, and the smooth muscles in the blood vessels that are in the skin. So just remember that, sympathetic, as opposed to the parasympathetic. Now, parasympathetic is described as rest and digest, and I always add poop and pee because I want you to know the sphincters that allow you to poop and pee are going to be relaxed. So the parasympathetic division goes to the ventral body organs, the viscera in the ventral body cavities, but it does not go to the skin. It does not go to the smooth muscles in the peripheral blood vessels. So this is going to be a distinction between sympathetic and parasympathetic. In our ventral body cavities, these are basically going to the same organs in the ventral body cavity. And they are antagonists to each other. They are doing the opposite actions. So if the sympathetic is going to the heart, it's going to speed up the heart rate. If the parasympathetic is going to the heart, it's going to do the opposite action. It's going to slow down the heart. But normally we're not either like this or like this, hopefully. We're somewhere in between. The goal is for us to keep a balance between these two systems. So we're just going to start with how a somatic motor versus visceral motor looks. So first we'll start with the somatic motor. It's going to the skeletal muscles. It's all voluntary. We say there is one motor neuron that extends from the central nervous system, and that one motor neuron lives where in the central nervous system? In your ventral horn of the spinal cord, right? So these somatic motor neurons are coming from the ventral horn of the spinal cord, and the axon is going to leave and go to the skeletal muscle. These axons that are leaving are well myelinated. And remember that phrase, a single motor neuron and all the muscle fibers it controls? That's because there is a single motor neuron that's sending its axon straight to the skeletal muscles. There is no synapse along the way. it looks like this. Here's our spinal cord. Here's our ventral gray horn right here. This is where our somatic motor neurons live. Here's the cell body. Here's the axon. One axon. It's not synapsing with anything till it synapses with the skeletal muscle. That's it. A single motor neuron going to the skeletal muscle, its target organ. It's a one motor neuron. So far, so good. Now let's see what happens with visceral motors. So the visceral motor system is a two-motor neuron system. We are going to say the first visceral motor neuron, because there's two. The first one is called the preganglionic neuron. We'll talk about why it's called that shortly. The preganglionic neuron, here the cell body of that first visceral motor neuron is in the CNS. And it has myelinated fibers also. The second visceral motor neuron is called the postganglionic neuron. The cell body of that second visceral motor neuron is going to be somewhere in the peripheral nervous system in a ganglion. Remember what a ganglion is? A collection of cell bodies in the PNS. Remember that? So this is not going to be the dorsal root ganglion. This is going to be a visceral motor ganglion. So this first visceral motor neuron is going to be synapsing with a second visceral motor neuron in a ganglion. That is why he's called the preganglionic neuron. Once they synapse in the ganglion, and this guy is going to be called the postganglionic neuron. And these postganglionic neurons, their axons are unmyelinated. So now let's look at what that two-motor visceral motor pathway looks like. So our first visceral motor neuron is always located in the CNS. Now, if it's within the spinal cord, it is going to be located in the lateral gray horn of the spinal cord. Remember, somatic motor neuron is down here in the ventral horn. Visceral motor neuron cell bodies are in the lateral horn. Always remember that. Now, when we talk about the parasympathetic, it'll be a little bit different with the cranial nerves that are part of the sympathetic. But for now, let's just figure out what this two visceral motor pathway looks like. So, start off, our cell body is in the lateral horn of the spinal cord. This axon is going to leave, and this axon is myelinated. And this axon of this preganglionic neuron is going to synapse with the second visceral motor neuron cell body in a ganglion, somewhere in the PNS. These are not dorsal root ganglion at all. Don't confuse it with dorsal root. They are completely separate. So this is going to synapse with the second visceral motor neuron in a ganglion. So now it's synapsed. And the second visceral motor neuron, its axon is now going to leave the ganglion. Its axon is unmyelinated, and its axon is going to be traveling to its target organ, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, glands. So, not too bad. 2 motor neuron pathway. And remember, the name of that first visceral motor neuron, called preganglionic neuron. The second one, the postganglionic neuron. So just remember that when you hear those terms, one is before the ganglion, the other one is after the ganglion. So let's just look at another diagram, and we're going to add the neurotransmitters. So this is going to be new to your diagrams. So back to your somatic motor, single motor neuron, going to the skeletal muscles, ventral horn, traveling along a myelinated axon. Its target organ is the skeletal muscle. This somatic motor neuron is going to release the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is going to be released onto the target organ of the skeletal muscle. So that you need to know, acetylcholine. Let's look at our parasympathetic 2 motor neuron pathway. We have our preganglionic neuron, cell body in the lateral horn. It also has a myelinated axon. That preganglionic axon is myelinated. It will synapse in a parasympathetic autonomic ganglion. And I'll show you where these are. And when this synapse with the second visceral motor neuron, this first preganglionic guy is going to release acetylcholine. And that's what's going to act on the second visceral motor neuron. The second visceral motor neuron, the postganglionic neuron, he is going to synapse with his target organs. Remember, this is parasympathetic, and he is also going to release acetylcholine. So, parasympathetic, acetylcholine at the first synapse, right here. At the target organ, the second postganglionic neuron is going to be releasing acetylcholine at the target organs. Acetylcholine, acetylcholine. Sympathetic. Here we go again. Lateral horn. We're going to synapse with our second postganglionic neuron in a sympathetic autonomic ganglion. It's going to release acetylcholine at this synapse. Just like here, acetylcholine is going to be released here also. The postganglionic neuron is going to synapse with its target organs and release norepinephrine. Norepinephrine, NE, norepinephrine. So acetylcholine, norepinephrine. So make sure you put this down somewhere on a card. Parasympathetic, acetylcholine, acetylcholine. Sympathetic, acetylcholine, norepinephrine. So we're going to start with the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. We said their ganglion are not next to each other. They are separate in your body. So let's look where the sympathetic is located in your nervous system versus the parasympathetic. So sympathetic preganglionic cell bodies, so your first visceral motor neuron, they are all located in the lateral horns of spinal cord levels T1 through L2. So lateral horns in the spinal cord at levels T1 through L2. That's what you need to know, T1 through L2. So far, so good? That's all you need to know for now. They call this the thoracolumbar division because it is using the thoracic level of the spinal cord and a little bit of the lumbar level of the spinal cord. So if you see that on some kind of exam, TEAS exam, you know this is sympathetic. T1 through L2. T1 through L2. Now let's go to where is the first visceral motor neuron cell body? The preganglionic cell body. Where is that located in the parasympathetic? First, what does that word para mean? Para means it is around. Around what? Around the sympathetic. It is basically telling you the parasympathetic division it's basically sandwiching the sympathetic. It is around the sympathetic division. They do not share anything. So where is sympathetic? T1 through L2. T1 through L2. In here. In the middle. Parasympathetic. Remember the cranial nerves that had parasympathetic fibers? Cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10? These are way up in the brain stem. They are not even in the spinal cord. So we have our 4 cranial nerves, and then way down in the sacral sacral region of the spinal cord, we are going to have some more parasympathetic preganglionic cell bodies. They are going to be in the lateral horn of spinal cord in levels S2, S3, S4, way down in the sacral level. This is where the parasympathetic preganglionic cell bodies reside. Not anywhere close. They are totally separate from sympathetic. So hopefully you can see that. They will call this the craniosacral division of the autonomic nervous system. Cranio, because it's coming up from your cranial nerves way up here. And sacral, because it is also coming from the spinal cord levels S2, S3, S4, way down here in the sacral region of the spinal cord. So that is all I'm going to show you on this video. I just wanted to show you what those terms meant. Preganglionic cell bodies, preganglionic neurons, postganglionic neurons, what those terms mean. Before you go on to the other videos, you have to figure those out or else you'll get confused. Preganglionic, before they get to the ganglion. Postganglionic, after they leave the ganglion. Now, one other thing I want to do with this video is, this is the last slide, is to show you their effects on different parts of the body. These are the organs you need to know what the effects on the sympathetic or parasympathetic are going to be. When you think of the sympathetic, think of what would happen if a tiger was chasing you, or some kind of wild animal was chasing you. Your body is going to be totally activated. And when we think of parasympathetic, think of what is going on, say after you just had your big Thanksgiving meal and you are just crashed on the couch after eating. So let's just take each one of these organs and you can figure it out. You don't need to memorize all this stuff. You just need to figure out why it would happen. So if we got our eye, we have our pupils. If that tiger is coming to try to eat you, you can bet your pupils are going to dilate. It is taking in, it is like letting in as much light into your eyes so you can see this tiger chasing you. It's going to dilate your pupil. The opposite effect would be the parasympathetic. It's going to constrict the pupil. So these are opposite actions. Skin structures. Remember the erector pili muscle, your Schwing muscle, your sweat glands, your blood vessels. If you are in an emergency situation, those erector pili muscles are going to stand up. And usually you can see this more on say like an animal that has lots of hair. If a cat is hissing at you and its sympathetic nervous system is activated, the hairs will stand up on that cat. Your sweat glands, you are running away. Yeah, when your sympathetic nervous system gets activated, you are going to start sweating. Now your blood vessels to your skin, blood is a precious commodity. We do not want to be feeding the skin structures with blood. We want to send that blood to organs that are going to help us run away. The skin is not an essential organ at that time. The blood is better suited if we are sending it to the muscles and our heart. So, vasoconstriction. We don't care about blood flow to the skin. Not important for our job of running away. Parasympathetic does not even go to the skin. Our salivary glands. What do we use our salivary glands for? When we smell something good, we start making lots of saliva. It's getting us ready to eat. So, if we're getting ready to eat, this is parasympathetic, rest and digest. We're eating. We're going to be increasing our salivary secretions from our salivary glands. In the sympathetic, decreased secretions, you're going to get a dry mouth. If you've ever had to give a talk in front of somebody and you were really nervous or anxious, you probably had a dry mouth. Sympathetic, opposite actions. Now to the heart. We're in our thoracic cavity. Cardiac muscle. Easy. Sympathetic, increase heart. Parasympathetic, decrease heart. The smooth muscle of all the air tubes. Remember, our air tubes are lined with smooth muscle. Lots of smooth muscle. And we have our goblet cells. Remember, it's pseudostratified ciliate columnar epithelium with goblet cells. In the sympathetic, you are going to dilate those air tubes, open up the air tubes to let as much air flow into our lungs as possible, and we're going to decrease the secretions. We're going to dry up those secretions. The opposite effect in parasympathetic. bronchoconstriction, and we're going to increase the secretions. So opposite effects. In the abdominal cavity, this is basically digestion. The sympathetic nervous system, if you're running away from a tiger, it could care less about digesting your food. We are stopping digestion. We're going to decrease everything. And we are going to squeeze your internal sphincter, which is a smooth muscle, your anal internal sphincter. That is going to squeeze tight. Squeeze tight. In the parasympathetic, we are digesting, so everything's going to be increased. Increased peristalsis, increased digestion, increased secretions. And we are going to relax that sphincter, that internal sphincter. It's smooth muscle, so we can poop. Remember, parasympathetic is rest and digest, poop and pee. So we're going to relax that sphincter and poop. Opposite actions. Here we're going to have the liver. The liver has something called stored glycogen. Glycogen is just stored up glucose. I think we went through this before. That glycogen is going to be broken down into glucose. We are going to release massive amounts of glucose into our bloodstream. Why? Glucose is energy. Energy for who? Your muscles, your brain. So we're going to release, the liver's going to break down glycogen and release glucose into your blood. The gallbladder is going to relax. The gallbladder contains bile, and we'll talk about bile when we get to the digestive system. We don't need bile. We're not digesting any fatty foods. So the gallbladder is going to be relaxed. Now, after you've just eaten lots of food for, say, Thanksgiving, the liver is going to convert all that extra glucose that you just ate and convert it into glycogen. We're going to save that glycogen for a rainy day. We're going to save that glucose for a rainy day. So if you need it, it will be there. You've just eaten a lot of fatty food. The gallbladder is going to contract. It's going to squeeze out the bile to help with fat digestion. The urinary tract. We're just going to be talking about the bladder and the internal sphincter. We have another sphincter so we can pee. Sympathetic, it's going to relax. We're not going to pee. Same thing, like the anal sphincter, the anal internal sphincter. Here's the urinary internal sphincter. It's going to contract. It's not going to let us pee. In the parasympathetic, rest and digest, poop and pee. We're going to contract that bladder. When you contract the bladder, you're squeezing the bladder, it squeezes the urine out. We're going to pee. We have to relax the sphincter. That internal sphincter is smooth muscle. It's going to relax, open up, so we can pee. Opposite actions. Now we're going to have the adrenal gland that sits on top of the kidney. And in the sympathetic system, it is going to stimulate the adrenal gland to release epinephrine and norepinephrine. These are hormones. They're going straight into our blood. So when you say you have an adrenaline rush, that is coming from the adrenal gland. It is releasing basically epinephrine straight into your blood. The adrenal gland, this is an endocrine gland. It's releasing the hormones epinephrine and norepinephrine. Parasympathetic does not go there. Now, we said all of these effects were basically antagonistic. They have opposite effects, right? Now, the only place where they are actually working together for the common good is the genitalia. And we'll just use the male genitalia because it's easier to visualize. So remember, they're working together. First, we're going to start with parasympathetic. The parasympathetic, think of parasympathetic for point. Point, that is going to give you the erection. Sympathetic is going to give you the shoot. Sympathetic S, shoot S, ejaculation. So they're working together. You can't do, you need an erection to have an ejaculation. So they're working together for the common good. So that's it for the introduction. We'll be going through these again when we do each of the sympathetic and parasympathetic. But for now, I just wanted to show you how they are having the opposite effects. Don't memorize these as much as you need to understand why they're doing these actions. So next video will be the parasympathetic nervous system.